Welcome to the Maintainable Software Podcast, where we explore the art of improving existing software with seasoned practitioners who have helped organizations overcome the problems often associated with technical debt and legacy code. I'm your host, Robbie Russell. On this episode, Robbie Wagner, who is one of the hosts of the Whiskey Web and Whatnot podcast and is currently a front-end engineer at Art19, which is an Amazon company. Robbie joins us from Great Falls, Virginia in the United States. Robbie Wagner, we're so glad to have you join us on Maintainable. Welcome.
Hey, thanks. Nice to be with another Robbie.
I would be amiss not to bring this up. So I'm curious, how often do people misspell your name?
All the time, all the time. Nobody usually asks if it's a Y or an IE. And then a lot of times they just mishear me. Like the people doing my coffee often give me a Robin or
Oh,
something else. I don't know.
I used to have to go around and remind people. I used to say, I'm Robbie with a Y, not IE. And that was just like how I would introduce myself to people. Do you get called Bobby very often?
No, I don't get a lot of Bobby. No.
Okay. I wonder if I get that because I have the Y on the end. I don't know. I was just recently on another podcast and I saw in there like your YouTube video, it's embedded in the video and it says Bobby. I was like, we talked for like 2 hours. Anyways, nice to meet you, another Robbie. So as you reflect on your experience in the industry, what do you believe are a few common characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained software?
Well, the answer is always it depends, right? But I
Sure.
think in terms of open source stuff, like seeing that there are commits and like releases and things within like the last few months and not like 5 years ago, seeing that there's like more than one person contributing to a project, because usually you don't want that bus factor of like, that person goes away and then you can't use it anymore. Obviously, like star counts are subjective, but like, that's a helpful metric sometimes. And good documentation and, just prioritizing, always upgrading. And like from an app perspective, I would say like teams prioritizing tech debt. Like no one ever wants to take the time to do any tech debt fixes because product always wants you to ship features like 24/7, but you really need to push back and force getting some time to update all of your issues there.
Did you know that there's services that will allow you to buy stars on GitHub?
I did not. Let
Yeah.
me go purchase one of those real quick.
Uh, I've gotten cold emails for that, and I'm like, what? So you can't even believe the data we see on. Anyways, putting that aside for like thinking about for those listening who aren't sure what specifically we're talking about. I'm assuming GitHub stars
Yep.
for like a repository or something. So when we think about like internal apps, organizations apps, and thinking about how teams product is always kind of like let's build more new things and add new things to the product backlog that are more driving the features and products, what have you. What have you seen work well for finding time to do those things or being able to like persuade the people that are kind of helping feed things into the I would say the funnel of work that the development team needs to take care of?
Yeah, I think for me, the secret is not asking for
Mm.
permission. Just do tech debt fixes as part of your work. Like as you encounter things that are outdated while you're building a feature, just fix them. Don't leave them how they were and like bolt onto it. Because if you're asking specifically, like I want a month to like refactor this stuff, they're gonna go, no, you can't do that. So you might as well like just kind of talk to other engineers and like have an understanding behind the scenes that like you're gonna strive for quality and like take the time to refactor as needed.
Do you find that, some people talk about like the kind of like the scout rule of like leave things better, and then when you find it, do you find that that's in reality easier to do than we kind of assume it might be just by saying that? Why does this seem to be a problem for so many organizations? Carry these
Yeah,
things.
I mean, I think people are busy and people get worn down. Like if you encounter insane tech debt all day, every day, you're just going to start to accept it. Whereas like when you start and you have fresh eyes, you're like, oh, all of this is bad. I want to fix all of it. But then you do have to get work done. So you kind of get worn down and you just need to, always be vigilant. And like if it'll take you less than an hour to fix this thing, just fix it while you're there. Like it's not something we want to keep perpetuating because someone like if you leave the company or the other people that have been there forever leave and other people join, they're gonna have no idea like what you were doing because it's really messy and gross.
Are there other aspects to like addressing those types of things you're talking about? Like, how would you describe what technical debt is? Maybe just at a kind of like a broadly.
Yeah, I mean, it can take different forms. An example that I've encountered recently, we had like a bunch of 8-year-old like SAS files, like not SCSS, but SAS. And so like converting those to use SCSS at least and like using some post CSS and like modern tooling and things like that, I would consider tech debt. We use Ember. I'm a big Ember fan. So like updating Ember versions, tech debt, like being on a Ember version that came out 5 years ago is probably not good for your application. Stuff like that.
Have you found that there'd be good patterns to allow those, when you talk about versionings in particular of things and keeping those things updated, do you find that there's good patterns for that? Or do you feel like most of the time your experience, you've seen that just get kind of pushed aside for a while, and then at some point people need to make this big leap to like, all right, it's finally time to like rip the Band-Aid off and do it? Or have you seen a good example of how that's been incrementally, regularly updated by a team?
Yeah, I think if you follow, like Ember has LTSs. So, like, if you're following LTS releases of whatever you might be using, I think that's a good time to, like, it's a good middle ground and time to update. Like, you don't want to update to every version because that's a lot of churn and always working on it. But, when there's a new, like, major release or LTS or like something that's not just updating all the time, I think that's a good time.
One of the things in prepping for the conversation, you mentioned that you like to automate the mundane, or automating the mundane is a mantra for many people, but you have taken it to heart. Can you share how automation has like kind of changed your approach and the teams that you've been part of, like how they think about software maintenance?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think automating a lot of little things is really important, like ESLint and Prettier and stuff. The biggest benefits there are one, you don't have to then argue about code style because something else has decided it for you. And then two, you don't have to ever like review code style. You like whenever you're doing reviewing something, you're just reviewing what that person reviewed. And then it keeps everyone on the same page. Like, other things like TypeScript, that helps too. It gives you all the same types. Make sure you're like if you're using a thing, you've used the right thing. Tools like CI stuff like Dependabot or whatever, also helpful. Like making sure that basically as many robots as possible can be tackling some of your tech debt and making sure your team is on the same page so that you're not the bad guy. Because that always gets like is a big problem. If I'm like, no, you did this stuff wrong, they're like, oh, well, that guy sucks. He told me like, you did all this wrong and I don't like dealing with him. But if a robot tells you, I'm like, oh, there's nothing I can do. Like Prettier said your format
Yeah.
was wrong. You got to reformat.
Have you found that there to be some other ways you've been able to inject some automation into your tooling? Do you lean a lot on things like automated testing and things like that as well in the environments you're working on? And do you find that on your teams you like to put together a lot of like templatizing of like how this is how we typically build new components for our application or what have you, whatever the terminology you might be using within your apps? But how do you think about that kind of stuff? Do you automate some of those things to make it simpler to follow consistent patterns as a team?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, testing is a first class citizen in Ember. So we have acceptance tests, integration tests, and unit tests, and like all of those things are very important. We can't like merge anything without having tests. So I'm a big fan of that. What was the second part of the question? Components and stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Components and templates and stuff like that.
Yeah. So we've been trying to get an official design system. It's not quite to that, but it's like we have a lot of prefabricated components and like a UI library that whenever possible, you should build things with those building blocks versus creating something new. Or if there is a thing that needs to be new, maybe think about making it generic and add it to that UI library because yeah, if we can encapsulate all of that in smaller pieces, then we don't have to like, you don't have to write as many other tests because you're just using that same piece that we've already tested thoroughly. So it's like it all works great.
That makes sense. So it's my understanding that at your day job, you've been helping introduce TypeScript into an older code base. Could you share a little bit about the benefits that you're seeing with that?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that I'm noticing introducing TypeScript is like people will just straight up use the wrong thing and no one will know.
Mm.
Like if there's no test coverage for a thing and you're passing the complete wrong thing, like if the function wants a number and you're passing like an array. And like for some reason it's working, but it's like not doing the thing you thought it was doing. And like a lot of those things get caught. That's a very easy win from TypeScript. Like if you're passing the wrong thing, it knows immediately. So finding that somewhat related, I've also been enforcing spelling. So I've been using C-spell to do like ESLint spell checking. And there's a lot of stuff where people will spell a variable name wrong. Like it works in the front end application because we've spelled it wrong everywhere there. But if it's like consuming a backend string that's supposed to become that variable name and they don't match, like you won't know until like you're running against the real backend that it didn't work. So spell checking both sides is like, oh yeah, that stuff's wrong. Like
Oh,
fix that.
interesting. And do you typically work in those types of projects in kind of with multiple repositories, or is that kind of like find that it's actually easier to keep that stuff in like one kind of mono repository type situation?
I've been becoming more open to mono repos. I think they solve a lot of problems. Our at work we have a mono repo for all the front end stuff, but we don't include the back end in that mono repo. So there is a division there. But yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for like if you have UI libraries and stuff that you want to ship separately, then having them be their own workspace in the mono repo makes a ton of sense.
How closely involved are you in helping like on the DevOps side of deploying your applications and stuff like that? Is that like just completely different team manages that the infrastructure for that, or do you get to be kind of like in the weeds on that stuff?
I don't really touch much of that, and it's kind of automated. We have like anytime a PR gets merged, it gets auto deployed to Gamma, so like you don't have to worry about that. The only time we have to do a release is like if we want to release to production, and then we cut a new branch and merge that in. And but it's
Sure.
all like all the actual pushing of assets and stuff is just in CI.
I haven't worked with any Ember things and it's been a while. I want to say over a decade, probably at least. But I'm always curious about like how, as people are coming into the industry and they're like learning different technologies and such, and they get onboarding, how do you think about onboarding new people? Earlier you mentioned that like healthy sign of a maintainable software project is that like multiple people are working on it. So do you put a lot of energy in thinking about how easy it is for new people to join the project and be able to spin it up and work on it? And like, how do you kind of think about that in that type of front end environment? Where I come from more of a back end environment myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think front end and back end, I have kind of the same philosophy of use something opinionated with lots of conventions. Like, so we use Ember and Rails. Rails is very opinionated too. So, like, a thing that tells you all the right ways to do a thing and doesn't give you a ton of flexibility seems annoying when you're starting, right? Because you're like, ah, well, I just want to work. Like, I don't want to learn all the ways that you're supposed to do this. But once you've learned all those things, if you jump to a new code base using that framework, you can be productive day one. So, I think that's the big benefit. There is a little more of a learning curve, but like if you're using a thing that has explicit ways to do something, then you also don't need a ton of your own internal documentation on like how you use this framework because you just use the framework stocks and like it makes it easier to all have like a common language to talk about how things should be done. And it's not like, oh, well, our components are in this weird folder somewhere because we decided they would be. No, they're in like components. That's where they go. Stuff like that.
Hey folks, it's me, Robbie. I want you to take a moment and close your eyes. Now picture your code and your applications as a symphony. Now to keep that symphony playing smoothly, you need an orchestra of tools. That's where our podcast sponsor, AppSignal, takes center stage. They combine the elegance of error tracking, the precision of performance monitoring, and the harmony of logging into one symphonic suite. Whether you're composing with Ruby, jamming with Elixir, orchestrating with Node.js, or harmonizing with Python, or maybe even a little bit of flourish of JavaScript, AppSignal's got the sheet music for you. And here's the crescendo. Plans start at just $23 US a month. That's gotta be music to your budget's ears. Plus they're certified ISO 27001 and they dance the GDPR and HIPAA compliance beats. So don't miss a beat, my friends. Head on over to appsignal.com and tell them that your good friend Robbie from Maintainable sent you. Now, open your eyes and let the symphony of smooth coding begin. Let's get back to our show. I didn't know that you were also kind of on the back end using Rails there, which is what my team kind of focuses on as primarily. And I have experience with the Ember and Rails kind of combinations there. How do you think about when you're adding, do you often spin up new repositories with new Ember projects, or do you typically just keep kind of working in a primary, like one main one? And is that something you think about, or and then when you look at like where, say, the frameworks are kind of going and you've been working in kind of the Ember world, do you think about much around like other things that are coming into the Rails world, like Hotwire and things like that as well? Or you're kind of like, we got this going pretty well. We don't need to kind of think about other frameworks and tech stacks.
Yeah, so to be clear, I don't really write any of the Rails, so I
Okay.
don't know a ton about that. I just know that we use Rails. But yeah, in terms of adding new things, we have a mono repo for the Ember side, so we just like we would make a new package there. We have it split into engines right now, which I don't know if I love because it has like a lot of separation that makes things like extra verbose, and I feel like well, sorry, I'm going to get a little in
Yeah,
the weeds
yeah.
here. So the new build tool for Ember, it's been out a little while now. It's called Embroider, and it will like tree shake and code split for you, like split at the routes. So you don't have to like worry about am I shipping everything just to start this app up. And that's kind of what engines solved a long time ago. They were
Mm.
like isolated routes. And so it's kind of like tech debt as well that we need to like get away from that, use the new build tool, and then it removes the need for all of that. But yeah, so they're split into like these folders for engines. So I would have kind of a similar, probably like philosophy of packages as we're adding new like things that should be self-contained.
I've got to ask, with a podcast named Whiskey Web and Whatnot, what's your go-to whiskey when you're contemplating the complexities of, let's say, front-end engineering?
Yeah, my favorite whiskey is I like ryes a lot and specifically Sagamore rye. They're out of Baltimore. We did a barrel pick with them too. Like we really like Sagamore.
Are you
Let
just
me
drinking
think
that
in
neat?
terms. Yeah.
You
Hmm.
like your right neat? All right.
Yeah, yeah. I used to use ice and then Chuck gave me a bunch of crap for using ice all the time. So I stopped doing it. And the glass really makes a difference because I was using like a big glass and now that I have a small, like specialized whiskey tasting glass, it helps not like burn your face as much and like
Yeah.
it's more enjoyable.
Let's dive a little deeper into your podcast. So I want to introduce our audience to this. Could you tell us a little bit about like what prompted it and what types of topics you're covering while you're drinking whiskey and whatnot?
Yeah, so I forget exactly when we started, but it was during the pandemic sometime. So, everyone was starting a podcast and Chuck and I were talking and we were like, what do we want to do? And it's like, well, it'd be nice if whiskey could be a business expense, right? So we kind of wanted to do that. And then we were like, well, what should the name be? And we wanted to play on like www. So
Mm.
we did Whiskey Web and whatnot. And like the format is we always start drinking some whiskey and we have that for like the first 5 to 10 minutes and talk about it and rate it. And then, that as you're drinking more and more of that whiskey, it kind of takes the edge off to make you talk a little bit more about like not just the technical side of everything, but we get a little more into like who are you as a person? Like what do you enjoy? Like things can get a little spicier than your typical like technical podcast. So we kind of refer to it as like a fireside chat with your favorite web developers. So that's kind of the format there.
Nice. I'm curious, as a fellow podcast host, how has being a podcast host impacted how you think about your work and impacted you in general, I suppose?
I mean, we're not that popular, so it hasn't like I'm not West Boss or anything, but I think people it's kind of weird because to some people, like if you're their go-to podcast, that you are kind of a big deal, but it's like I'm not a like known everywhere or anything, and I think it does help if you're like trying to get a new job or whatever, and you're like, look, I do this podcast, I do open source work, like anything you can point to as artifacts that you're creating around the web development space, I feel like is always helpful. People can see that you're getting your name out there, you're helping other people learn, like all of that kind of stuff. Self-promotion is always like it feels weird too. Like I've been talking some about that recently of like at work, you should go in a Slack channel and be like, I did this cool thing. And like that feels weird to do that, like tooting
Mm.
your own horn too much. But like if you don't, how will people know about it? And then like when it comes for promotion time and stuff, it's like, well, I haven't heard anything from this guy. He probably hasn't done anything, I guess, even though you've shipped a ton of stuff.
Mm.
If you're not advocating for yourself, people don't know.
How do you think about that in your type of role? Do you keep track of some of your internal, like within the organization you're working within? Do you track that stuff, or do you think it's like mostly regularly sharing that in like a Slack channel or promoting? What sort of patterns are you using to remind yourself of what you even accomplished for yourself, let alone like a manager or something else in your organization?
Yeah, it's a little more art than science, but like I'm doing things like labeling PRs with like, is it a feature or an enhancement or is it tech
Mm.
debt or is it, keeping track of like the higher level things I'm working on. And then, make sure all of that is tied to tickets so that you can look back and see like, oh, I worked on these features and whatever. And then like I've been doing things like creating learning videos and stuff for
Mm.
people. Like, is that going to be helpful? Maybe. Like, are people going to use it? I don't know. But like you put it out there and it's like, you just want to keep creating stuff that you think is going to be helpful
Mm.
and like make sure you tell people it's there and then see what happens.
Do you have any advice for those listening that are like, well, I don't have fancy microphones and a webcam set up to do things like that, but I'm kind of curious about maybe at least in my day-to-day work at my company, maybe they're on a small team and they want to be helpful like that. Any advice on how they could start doing that without making it seem like this big thing that they need to make up like a personal investment into?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at making content, there's a lot of levers you can pull. If you have an iPhone, the camera and microphone is actually really good. I don't know. I'm not educated on if you have Android, what options you have there, but I know iPhone works really well. So if you've got that, you can just start there. If you want to have a little bit more dedicated stuff, there's some great cameras that are like $100. Mics are like $100, like pretty approachable, like nothing too insane. And yeah, I have specific recommendations for those if people want them. But, I think don't worry so much about is everything perfect? Does it sound great? Does it look great? Just worry about creating stuff because you're likely to help someone with anything you create, regardless of the quality, unless it's just really, really terrible. Like, don't make something that sounds like, you're a staticky TV in a cave with like, as long as you can make out what you're saying and it's like educational, people will learn from it.
Do you use any sort of multimedia things outside of like the screenshots in your pull requests? Do you ever put like a little video showing how something works or to help kind of speed up part of the process so they don't need to like go test it out themselves in their own branch or something?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I use Cap. It's a app for Mac that lets you it like lives in your menu bar. You just click it and it'll like record and you can either do videos or GIFs or whatever. And then you just throw that up and then people don't have to like spin it up and run it. They can just say like, "Oh, I see you clicking through it. You've done the things I thought we should check. Looks good."
I know that you have in the past worked with clients. Did you ever find that you were able to use technology in that way to help speed up some of the back and forth process with your clients outside of like, I always wish that every time a client put a request in, if they had a solved bug, like include screenshots or like a little screencast or something. But did you ever find that was helpful to show that you were able to identify the problem that they solved and fixed it and they can show it so you don't have to like go through a huge laborious back and forth process with them?
I didn't do that a ton actually. I think when I was working with clients more, it was like we would do actual demos. Like I would be on a call with them and like click around through stuff. Probably would have been more efficient to, to leverage some videos occasionally, but didn't use that a ton then.
Can appreciate that. I'm curious, where you're at now. Was that a software project that you joined that had already been around for a bit, and then, or was it something that you were around kind of when you generated the new Ember app?
It's been around a long time. So I joined Art 19 January of 2023.
Okay.
So been there like a little over a year now. And they've been around for like 8 to 10 years, something like that. So a lot of tech debt, as you can imagine. But yeah, they were acquired by Amazon, I think like 2 or 3 years ago, something. So like they're newer to Amazon, but they've been around a long time.
Were you hired in to come help play a big role in helping get some of that stuff updated, or was it just like they were looking for Ember developers, or how did that kind of come about? And like, what was your kind of go-to focus for a while? Because you mentioned, I'm assuming that's part of the project of working with TypeScript and introducing that. So was there kind of a plan that was already in place, or is that something that they hired you and then you kind of assess the situation and then you sort of make recommendations for how to kind of navigate forward for the project?
Yeah, I was brought in as just like they needed Ember developers, and it's hard to get Ember developers. They can pass the Amazon interviews.
Mm,
So I was lucky to get through there, I guess. But in terms of what I was hired for, it was just to be a normal person shipping features
mm,
for a team. So then as I got into the code, I started identifying like all of this tech debt and stuff we could do to improve it. Like, for example, we had 3 other repos that all had to build and took like 30 to 40 minutes to build. And then like once they were all done, you could like test them together. I mean, you put it all in a mono repo and it's doing it
mm.
concurrently, and you have a third of the build time, like stuff like that. So yeah, I was just kind of like I can't when I see stuff that I want to fix, I can't leave it there. I have to like improve it while I'm there. So a lot of it has just been self-directed stuff I've seen as I've encountered it.
Are there any data metrics that you find valuable to track, kind of to get a sense of like the health of your software delivery cycle?
Yeah, we don't do a great job of tracking things. We've been trying to improve that, but tracking how long your CI time takes is definitely helpful if you're keeping that reasonable because you don't want it to take forever to like the rail side is another story. It takes a while. Like we'll be like, let's get this release out. It's like, all right, maybe we'll have it out tomorrow. Like I don't understand the whys there, but it's like
Mm.
there's a lot of stuff that takes like 4 hours for a build or something. And
Oh
it's like,
my.
I'm not sure why. But yeah, so like just keeping on track of like your developers really want to be productive and they don't want to wait 4 hours to see if their stuff passes. They want to like get feedback now and like if they need to change something, change it. So keeping those times short is good. Ensuring you have good test coverage. That's always, hard to guess because you could have like 100% coverage on paper, but then you have all these cases you didn't think about. So it's like, yes, you covered that line of code, but you didn't use it in a certain way that like, but still having higher percentages is better. So try to have tests for as many things as you can and increase those numbers. But it's kind of a weird metric to track.
We'll be back with our interview with Robbie in just a moment. Hi, it's me, Robbie. Robbie. Not the real Robbie, because Robbie also is a Robbie and a real Robbie, but I'm the host, Robbie with a Y. The other Robbie is Robbie with IE. Let's make that distinction. Anyways, I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you for listening to the podcast. If you're finding these conversations valuable, please consider sharing a link amongst your peers and or writing a review on Apple Podcasts to help spread the word. I think you can do that on Spotify now as well. Also, do you know someone that I should be interviewing on the podcast? Shoot me an email to Robbie with a Y at maintainable.fm. And now, let's get back to our interview with Robbie Wagner. What about, does your team participate in any sort of like developer satisfaction type experience type related type surveys at all as an organization? And like, do you have like engineering managers that are keeping track of stuff like that to think about like what the team sentiment is and how do you think about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we have. So Amazon has surveys that go out to like all developers, and it's like a daily question, and they'll be about work, your manager, whatever. But like our problem is, well, it's not a problem. I think it's a good thing that we're a little bit different, but we use like not a ton of the Amazon stuff. So like the questions they're asking aren't always relevant. So like we use GitLab and they use like Amazon proprietary something, you know? So like stuff like that. We use like tools that I enjoy using, but our process is not as streamlined. Like we have to make that up on our own of like, how are we satisfied? What do we want to improve? And we do try to keep the lines of communication open. We have like a front end community that chats about everything, and if anyone has a problem, we're happy to try to address it.
I'm curious, what sort of like end-to-end testing frameworks are you using in that space, and is it kind of consistent with what the Amazon front end engineering teams are doing, or?
Yeah, so the Ember side, Ember uses QUnit, so it's all that. And then we have like some Cypress tests that kind of try to run the API and the front end and click around and whatever, but not as much of that. We have like one QA person for the entire Art19 org. So it's a lot more of like not what you would consider a true end-to-end test all the time, but it's like we'll spin up the Ember app against a mocked backend, click around, do all the things. It's not the real back end, like 90% of the time it's not. So there's a gap there that we could improve for sure.
That 4-hour build time is definitely longer than it probably needs to be.
Yeah.
If your folks need to take that offline with me, feel free to reach out. Happy to talk about that.
Sure.
I'm also curious, like maybe for those that aren't familiar with Art19, could you tell us a little bit about what Art19 does there?
Yeah, Art19 is a podcast hosting company. So I think they were the first ones to do like dynamic ad insertion type stuff. And like, I don't know, they have like patents for that kind of stuff. So it's similar to like a Megaphone. I'm trying to think what else. I don't know. Megaphone is like our biggest competitor, and Spotify is killing it right now. So like, it's always a stressful time talking about the new things coming out in Megaphone and Spotify for podcasters and stuff. But it's similar to that. It's lets you, upload your audio, have different feeds so that if you have like a paid feed and a free feed and ads and not an ad insertion. And one of the big selling things is like, since we're part of Amazon, we have this like huge automated ad network, right? So like if you have unsold ad spaces, we just fill them up with like whatever. Yeah.
Are you also kind of using your own platform then for Whiskey Web and whatnot?
I am not. I haven't gone down that path. And really, the main reason why is because we don't support video right now. And no one really does except for Spotify for podcasters. So, like, even Megaphone, it's like a beta to do video. So, yeah, we're kind of stuck until that's a wider industry thing.
Curious to see how that kind of pans out. You started your podcast as a video podcast, right?
No, we started as audio only.
Oh, did you?
And
okay.
Yeah, I personally think it's super weird that people want to have video for a podcast. Because like if I'm listening to a podcast, I'm driving, mowing, doing something else. I don't want to watch it. But like a lot of younger people want to watch it. So like, okay, we'll give you video if you want to watch it.
It's interesting because for those listening, which is everybody, because we don't have a video version of this, Robbie and I are both looking at each other through a Zoom video chat. And so like I use the video just to have like some FaceTime with the people I'm talking to. But then I've always been like, I don't feel like if I take the video, if I were to go down that path, and listeners, feel free to reach out and say like, I really wish you had video for your episodes. I'd be open to considering it, but I feel like it makes it more complicated. I have to think about what I'm going to wear.
Yeah.
Not that we're not both well dressed right now, but I just came back from a run and I'm not at my best yet. And I think about just the editing complexities or get a little bit more complicated. And then I also worry that like bringing certain people on on the podcast, they'll be more nervous about it. But I don't know it to be true or not. So that's why I'm not doing the video stuff. And also, I think the editing part will just make it a little bit more expensive overall to produce. And I'm trying to keep my
Oh, it
costs
makes
down.
it
Yeah.
more than double
Yeah.
the editing cost. Yes.
Do you self-edit the episodes yourself, or do you use an editor for on your end?
We do now. We used editors before when we had lots of money from consulting, and now we
Oh,
do it ourselves.
okay.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was very intentional that every episode's been edited by someone else, and I'm on my second editor after 170 episodes, and very very fortunate. So I don't have to like listen to the episode before it gets recorded, and just like I just listen to it when it shows up on Spotify. I'm like,
Yep.
cool, I can listen to this like 6 weeks later or something. But I'm kind of going back to one of the questions I had mentioned earlier around podcasting and helping you. And you talked a little bit about how that can be good for self promotion and things like that as well. But how is it helping you? I like to have these conversations with people because I feel like I'm getting like free advice all the time and connecting with people. How do you feel like it's helped you professionally, just like within your own self?
Yeah, I do think it is a nice built-in benefit that like technologies you probably wouldn't encounter, you get to talk about on the podcast. Like, Bun is a big thing in the JavaScript community right now. And like we had Jared on to talk about Bun and like super smart guy, would have never known anything about Zig otherwise.
I don't even know what
Um,
Zig is.
it's what
What's
Bun
Zig?
is built in. Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
and who's Jared?
Um, yeah, yeah.
I don't know. Is Jared the
Oh
creator
yeah,
of Bud?
Jared's the creator of
Okay.
Bun. So like, you get that. We talked to the creator of Penpot, which is like a Figma competitor, but it like lets you check all of your designs into like GitHub basically, so you can like edit them as a developer or a designer and like I don't know, that there's like, cool stuff there. So like you definitely learn about a lot of stuff that I probably wouldn't have encountered unless I spent a bunch of time just playing with random stuff. So I do think that's very cool.
That is the little secret there. It's just a good excuse to get to have a lot of conversations with interesting people, like other people named Robbie.
Yeah.
You're the first Robbie I've had on the podcast, so
Hmm.
myself feel welcome. I think well, I was a guest once on the podcast. I didn't interview myself, but I made one of my employees interview me. I think they were okay with that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, going back to earlier we were talking about technical debt, like does your team, you mentioned like you'll label things like a pull request as technical debt. Do you keep a backlog as a team somewhere, or how do you kind of organize some of that work so that you can go back, like maybe not today, but at some point we should come back and do this? Or is this just things that you all just kind of know and carry this around in your head? They're like, oh, we should probably take care of that at some point, and then you do it.
Yeah, it's more in people's heads and like we all have things we're passionate about improving. So those people will like we have a very document heavy culture at Amazon, so we will write up like documents about this thing's a problem. Like one thing I'm writing up soon is like we should use native date pickers because date picker like we have a 3,000 line date picker and I'm
Mm.
like why? There's one built in to HTML. So like stuff like that we would write a document about, get consensus on, we would do the whole process, but then there isn't like it doesn't necessarily go in a backlog that like we're going to pick up. It's just like the person that kind of pushed that document through and got it approved, it's on them to either do the work or delegate the work. There's like not an official backlog we pull from right now.
So your team is like, was that idea of using a lot of documents to like, was that something you had been doing prior to joining, getting or working at a company that was acquired by Amazon, or was that when you were introduced there, or is that something you kind of always kind of had as a team when you were working on other projects and stuff?
So the answer is twofold there. Like Art19 was doing documents
Mm,
before Amazon. I wasn't there before they were part of Amazon though. So I don't know fully. I know they did a different style of document because it was like a different template. Myself at other companies, it depends on the company. Like Netflix, for example, is very loose with their like organizations, like whatever works for your team. If you want to write a document, cool. If you don't, don't. Do you want to use Jira? If you do, cool.
mm.
If you don't, you want to like put everything in a Google Doc to track stuff, fine. So they have like a lot of freedom, whereas like a company like Amazon is very like, this is how you should do it.
Mm. I'm curious when you think back at that Netflix environment, did you find that that was liberating that you had every team could kind of pick their own path, or did people switch teams very often and go like, what the hell's going on over here versus what they were doing somewhere else? Or
Yeah, I found it very odd personally, being used to like having Jira or something like Jira. I was like, where's my tickets? Like I
Mhm.
want my tickets. But yeah, I think like while I was there, they were working on like solidifying at least the tech stack like across the
Mhm.
board. So all teams would use React and like I don't know what the back end was, honestly, because I've done front end for like a decade, so I don't pay attention to back end that much. But yeah, so I think like you want your teams to be as aligned tech stack as you can, but like if they want to manage the way they do work differently, I think that's okay.
I'm curious if you think about your career arc and you're focusing a lot on front end stuff. Are there other technology things that are popping up that are catching your eye that you're like, oh, I wonder if how that's going to evolve on the front end? Or do you think about building more like native type applications and like taking some of those technical skills into those spaces? Or do you do much things where you're building native related stuff with the front end technologies that you're already working with? Do you think about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, yeah. I think if you're looking for career growth or a job in general right now, learning React is not what you want.
Why not? Why
There's
not?
because everyone knows React. It's very commoditized. Like backend is what we need more of now. We've like it swings, it ebbs and flows, like, but you should probably learn some of everything. So I always say you should learn like something very niche, like Ember's pretty small and like not a ton of people use it, and like you can be an expert in that. And then React, like everyone knows. So like learn both. That way you've covered your bases on like you can get jobs both ways. But I think, yeah, we're getting into a time where things are going to get way more complex. You got AR, which is going to have like infinite screen sizes, plan for that. And then like also as like WASM and different stuff, like being able to run basically anything in the web. Like, why are we going to need any kind of native apps anymore? Let's build it all as a web app, roll your Python up into WASM or whatever, and like run that stuff in the browser. Like, I think that is a phenomenon that I really enjoy that like web technologies can build basically anything now because you don't have to learn Swift to build a like iOS app. You like whatever.
I have a couple quick last questions for you. Is there a non-software, non-technical book that you find yourself recommending to peers?
I don't really read, to be honest. The last book that I read was like that I thought was really good was in high school, and it was called Gangster by Lorenzo Carcaterra. So that one's pretty good. If
All
you,
right.
he's the guy that like writes for like the mob episodes of Law and Order. He's like helps with those. So
Hmm.
like it's pretty good stuff.
Nice. I'll look that one up. I am not familiar with it and include a link to that in the show notes for people. I'm trying to think of like the one of the last books I read in high school, but that was such a long time ago. How long ago was high school for you?
I graduated in 2009.
You're just a kid. Okay. Okay. Yeah, well, that's awesome. And where can listeners best follow your thoughts and ruminations about software engineering online?
Yeah, so I'm Robbie the Wagner everywhere, Twitter, pretty much just on Twitter, but I also do have my own website, robbiethewagner.dev, where you can find links to other things.
Is that your middle name?
No,
No.
no, it's so I wanted to have just Robbie Wagner everywhere, but it was you could only get it on like half the platforms. And I don't like when it's like, oh, I'm this here and I'm this here and I'm this here. So I wanted to have the same thing everywhere. So I was going to be the Robbie Wagner. Like I'm me. But
Yeah.
then Chuck was like, you know, it would sound badass. Like just do Robbie the Wagner, like Robert the Bruce. Like I'm like that does sound kind of cool. So that was that's why I did that.
Nice. How did you and Chuck meet then?
We met Well, we first met, I interviewed at his company and he did not hire me. Then later he helped run Ember meetups in DC.
Okay.
So we like co-ran those, and I think like I was working on starting my agency and I had like some extra work, so I like used him on a contract, and yeah, we just took it further, became like full-on business partners, and the
So
rest is history.
you got to kind of hire him later on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Funny how that always kind of comes around. Yeah, my business partner, he was stuck having to be my senior. When I was a junior developer, he got kind of assigned to be my mentor for a while, and then I left, and then I started my own thing, and then a couple years later, I'm like, please come work with me, and eventually now he's a business partner. I got to hire him back, but at one point he was my mentor. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, great. I'm looking definitely include links to your podcast and to your site, Robbie the Wagner, on all the socials. And with that, it's been such a delight having you join us at Talk Shop today, Robbie. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.